Welcome, everyone, to the Green Tent Circle, where every Saturday we meet in circle to care for ourselves, one another, and Mother Earth. And all are welcome. It's an open circle where we share resources, we share events, we share our feelings, we pray for one another, we collaborate, and it's just an amazing circle. And once a month, on the third Saturday, we get to illuminate leaders, women leaders. And I can't tell you how excited I am about you meeting Jackie Patterson, who I think I've known since the U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta way back when. But she is a true champion and advocate for women of color. She is somebody who believes in systemic change and has worked on that for years and helping people to understand what it takes to change a racist, sexist, classist system, an environment and an economic system that only supports a few. So she started the Chisholm Legacy Foundation, and she's going to tell you about it. Jackie also was at the Parliament of World Religions, and she was on a panel along with Osprey, who you'll meet at another time. And it was on women on the front lines of climate action. And that's what she is. And so without further ado, I'm going to first do what we always do to honor that we are in a sacred circle. So I'll ring this bell. And just for everybody just to relax, settle down. And then, Jackie, you can just tell us more about yourself. And why did you start the Chisholm Foundation Project? What inspired you? The other thing I want to tell you about Jackie, Jackie is always on the road. Jackie truly connects on a deep level with grassroots women. So she is always on the road. And I'm hoping she's caring for herself. And we will learn how we can stay connected to her through her website and how we can support her project.
It's an honor to share space with you, and always I always come when Anne calls because she's such a beloved friend, and so anyone who she considers to be a part of her circle, I'm looking forward to getting to know better. So yeah, so my name is Jackie Patterson, as was stated, and I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. My dad was from Jamaica, West Indies, and my mom came up to Chicago through the not so great migration from Mississippi, and a place called Dublin, Mississippi. When COVID, just as people were starting to kind of move around during COVID, the first thing I did was get in my car and drive down to where my mom was born in Dublin, Mississippi. My brother met me there. We looked up on ancestry.com and we managed to find the original census from the year she was born, the census record, and we went and we visited and just walked through the streets of where she was from, and right across from where she was from there was a cotton field, and we went over there and just walked through, and I bent down and picked a piece of cotton and thought about the lives of people back then. And at the same time, there were these big industrial plows that were harvesting the cotton. And I thought, this was our labor back then, our enslaved labor. And I thought about the essential work and essential workers in the context of COVID, and thought about how people are doing essential work but considered to be disposable workers. And it really was a deep reflection of that time. So I was, like I said, I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, and it was we were kind of on the other side of the tracks from a wealthier white community, and we were relatively insulated in our community. It was a community that had a lot of gang activity. It was a community where people were kind of working class, so to speak, if that's a term. But my dad worked nights as a diesel mechanic, and my mom worked all the time, taking care of my brother and I. And my brother was, in that area and in kind of life, he was kind of centered in our family because it was always about protecting my brother as a Black male, and the threats that Black males face. I remember standing out on the porch with him, and my mom came out. I was like leaning on the rail to the side, and my brother was kind of standing in the middle of the porch. And she came out. She's like, "What are you doing out here?" Which she said to him, and she had a note of kind of almost panic, like, "What are you doing out here?" And then she looked over and she saw me, and she's like, "Oh, you're with him." And then she went back in, and I'm like, "What?" I don't know what she expected me to do if anything happened, but it was kind of the family dynamic. This notion, even though I was the younger by 2 years, there was a lot of kind of emphasis on protecting my brother. So anyway, those are just kind of little tidbits. But again, I grew up in an immigrant family, so there was reggae dancing, reggae music, reggae dancing, reggae parties, and lots of Jamaican food, and then also kind of a Jamaican food and then soul food, because my mom was from Mississippi, so it was an interesting existence there. I decided I wanted to go into special education. So that was my first degree, was in special ed. And I ended up going to Jamaica as a Peace Corps volunteer. I applied for Peace Corps because I wanted to learn Spanish, and among other things, I wanted to just learn a different language, be immersed in a different language, a different culture, and I thought this would be a great way to do it. But because Jamaica has such a high rate of people dropping out of Peace Corps, they thought since I was Jamaican, I might have a better chance of making it through. So that was an interesting dynamic in of itself. But I did special ed as a teacher in Jamaica, and also had a secondary project on environmental justice. I worked with a community that had their water supply contaminated by shell oil. It was an interesting dynamic, to say the least, because it was a typical David and Goliath situation where this community had been poisoned by this stuff that from the shell oil plant that was next to it. It got into the water supply, and the community was fighting for justice. And what they got was like some ventilated, improved pit latrines for the community, and like some funding for a 3R program, recovery, reuse, recycle, in their elementary school. That's what they got for being poisoned by this multilateral, multinational organization. So, company. And so that was like the beginning of my understanding of, it's very eye-opening. And I started a book club when I was there. We read books like The Spook Who Sat by the Door, about a Black man. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rev. Yes. And we read The Invisible Man as well, which is another classic. And then we read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and really we're looking at even the development paradigm and how even Peace Corps fit into that development paradigm, because we know in some places it was known for being a front for the CIA. And so that was interesting, just being even a part of that institution, knowing that history, and who knows how long, how ancient that history was at that point. But when I was in Jamaica, it was a time where during the time I was there, Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and he came to Jamaica, and there was a parade as he rode down the street in the motorcade. and everyone celebrated. It was a nationwide celebration of his liberation. I also started a group called it was a chapter of AWID, the Association of Women in Development, and it was a time when I started to see this gender justice piece firsthand from a global perspective, and seeing just even my supervisor in Peace Corps was anyway, how do I want to start to divulge people's because I realize it's being recorded, but there's a lot of dynamics there around gender injustice that went on, and so it was a very eye-opening on so many levels, understanding geopolitical politics, understanding gender justice in a different way, understanding the role of multilateral organizations like the IMF and World Bank. You all might have seen the film Life and Debt. I definitely recommend it if you haven't, and because it features Jamaica and the role of the IMF and World Bank in Jamaica's situation. And it was just such a study in just extremes of inequality. I mean, you have people living in what they call shanty towns, and then you had this kind of extreme wealth that was held largely by people who didn't even live in Jamaica. So these big hotels and so forth, all that opulence, people would come there during the day to work and then go back to shanty towns at night. So many of the people, and it was such a small sliver of middle class. So those 3.5 years there were foundational for me. So anyway, I went on to study public health and social work. I did an MSW and an MPH, and went back into international work a little bit, working on HIV and AIDS globally. And it was also there doing the HIV and AIDS globally that I saw the gender justice dynamics of HIV, as well as the intersection between HIV and AIDS and violence against women, and working from largely in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Haiti and Dominican Republic and some other places. So fast forward, I don't know how much detail you want on all of this. Fast forward to more recently, I spent 11 years as the founding director of the NAACP's Environmental and Climate Justice Program. And that was after serving for a couple of years as a senior women's rights policy analyst for ActionAid International. And in doing that is when I started to look at the intersection of gender justice and, again, macro finance, IMF, World Bank, food security, and climate change. And so when I was doing that with ActionAid International, I actually started a group called Women of Color United, where it was women from around the United States connecting with women from around the globe around this intersections around violence against women, HIV and AIDS, and then also climate change. And after I was ending my time with the ActionAid, I actually went on this road tour called the Women of Color for Climate Justice Road Tour, where I was interviewing women who were at the intersection of climate justice and gender justice, either implicitly or explicitly. So I interviewed women who were survivors of Hurricane Katrina, who told the stories about gender injustice in that context. I heard the stories from women who were working in farmlands in the South and were experiencing the drought and not necessarily having a cushion that other farmers had, and not having the infrastructure to do the type of irrigation that was necessary to survive the drought. I spoke to one woman named Elizabeth, whose sister had the breadbasket in her country of Cameroon had dried up, and in a border crossing, she ended up being sexually assaulted in a border crossing because of the insecurity of border crossing, and ended up with HIV as a result. I spoke to some folks when I was still in ActionAid, but I was doing interviewing with a focus group with some women in Mpumalanga, and they were asking for access to female condoms for girls who had to walk to get water, and they were saying that they had to walk further and further to get water because of the drought and due to climate change. And the likelihood of them being sexually assaulted on that walk was so high that they just wanted them to be able to wear female control condoms every time they were walking. And so that was one of the most sobering things I've ever heard, to say the least. I mean, just the notion of them being so assured that this would happen, that they wanted to just constantly wear the female condoms. And so all of that, going into the work of the NAACP gave me the lens around gender justice entering in, and then working with the NAACP gave me the deep racial justice lens. And so now it's so looking at racial justice impacts, I mean, it's everything from, you know, the whether it's oil and gas industry, landfills, coal, all of these are disproportionately impacting Black communities. And then also, we also know that the combination of the redlining and the history of economic deprivation means that Black communities are more likely to be on the front lines of climate impacts, as well as the drivers of climate change. And so whether it's poor housing stock, which means that our houses are more likely to be destroyed, or being in the floodplains, which means we're more likely to get flooded, all of that was an education over my time with the NAACP. But it was also an education around the ways that we're leading on the solutions, and particularly as Black women. And so that has been extremely inspiring. I just wrote this paper called 15 Ways that Black communities are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and 45 ways that Black communities are leading on climate justice, to really lift up the fact that there are those solutions, and folks are leading on the vision and the path that we need to take to just transition. And so leading me to starting the Chisholm Legacy Project. Again, Shirley Chisholm was the first African American in the U.S. Congress, the first African American woman to run for president of the United States. And she was, her light and her leadership was a rallying cry for us when I was at the NAACP, because her campaign slogan was "Unbought and Unbossed." And at the NAACP, so often our communities were subject to industry and other people's attempts to buy and boss our communities. And they really played on the vulnerabilities of our communities, and put across false narratives that people were vulnerable to taking up. And so we really use that as kind of a rallying cry to say, it doesn't have to be that way. We can really rise above these machinations of these folks. And so that she became this kind of iconic muse for us, an inspiration for us in her legacy. And so as I decided to step out and do my own organization, I really wanted it to sit at the intersection of racial justice, gender justice, and really wanted it to be inspired by the life and legacy of Shirley Chisholm. So between her Unbought and Unbossed moniker, the fact that she also had a Caribbean origins was personally inspiring to me. And she also used to be a school teacher, just as I was. So I was personally inspired by her. And then also just her ability to just staunchly stand up to adversity, but to do it with a smile. Like just as many of her pictures where she's looking fierce are pictures of her smiling. And people who knew her just experienced her as a gracious and humble person, and that all was very appreciated and inspirational. Also, the fact that she visited George Wallace when he was in the hospital after he had been, so that kind of grace and love that transcends politics and so forth, that she was, that they had actually struck up a friendship in spite of their very different views on what changes we need to have in the world. And so that that was also inspiring to us. And so as we started the Chisholm Legacy Project, it was working at this intersection of gender justice, racial justice, and really centering love, centering a caring economy, centering a caring, having a caring culture as an organization. Of course, the devil and the angels are in the details. So, we set out to do that, and we're definitely still in the storming part of group formation. But but we are trying trying to do that. If you know anyone who's looking for a job as Deputy Director of Organizational Culture, let me know because we want our values to actually be followed by our actual practices, and people aren't completely experiencing that now. But anyway, so the Chisholm Legacy Project, we center community building. We work particularly with freedmen settlements, who are formerly people who are emancipated from enslavement and settled these communities. We found that these communities are so many of them are in the same state as they were when emancipation came. One of the communities we worked in had well water up until the mid 80s, and since the well water got contaminated, they haven't had running water since the 80s. And they're right outside of Dallas, one of the richest cities in the world. Another community we're working in is Ironton, Louisiana, where after the latest storms, the storms of 2021, I think it was Hurricane Ida, one of those. They had their graves were unearthed, and so they collected the remains and put them in a trailer, and they're still there. Like, the remains are still in a trailer of their ancestors, sitting in a trailer on the outside of the community. So the level of injustice is just profound. And so these are the communities that we are focusing on, the communities where our criteria is actually that nobody else is working in the community, so that we are working with communities that have no one, that have been neglected and been, invisibilized over the years. As a starting communities that we work with. We also are doing movement building support, helping Black community or movements for Black liberation to center climate justice and gender justice, and the movement for climate justice to center gender justice and Black liberation. So we're acting as a liaison there. We're working on bending the mainstream arc towards equity and justice. And so, we recognize that so much of the world is mainstream, and we can't just continue to just organize in our little bubbles. We also need to make sure that we're spreading the gospel elsewhere as well. And then our fourth but not final pillar is Black femme well-being. So not leadership development, not capacity building, just well-being. So whether it's healing justice or making sure that folks have rest and retreat resources, whatever women need to feel well and to feel held as they hold so much. Those are kind of the four pillars of the work of the Chisholm Legacy Project. So that's it in a nutshell.
Jackie, I have just one. You're amazing, and I hope that well-being that you do it too, because I know you are so dedicated. A book that I read, I love historical novels, and the book that I read was called The First Ladies, and it is about Eleanor Roosevelt relationship with Mary McLeod Bethune. And the thing that I love about it is not only is it wonderful, and I have one quick story, but it was written by a white woman, Marie Benedict, and a Black woman, Victoria Christopher Murray. So they modeled what Eleanor and Mary's relationship was, a white woman and a Black woman as allies and working together. And one of the things that Eleanor did was when Mary came up from Florida, and she had a school and a university, and she started the NAACP. I mean, she started everything. She was the mother of of the Black movement is that they met in this restaurant where, of course, Blacks were not allowed. And they sat in the window seat. So everybody walking by DC saw them. And they became really in love with each other in a deep sisterhood and supported one another. And so it's just, what I love about novels is because they're always so well written. You could just go, it's like they're enjoyable. But how can we be allies? What are just some ideas? Just throw them out. Because we don't want your work to be marginalized. I don't want your work to not be, the best kept secret. I want to be able to support.
Yes, so many ways. So an ally directly to our work is one thing, and then I would also say an ally to the work of any local environmental justice organizations, or in one's community would definitely be where I would maybe point folks to first. But an ally to our work directly is everything from, like, so taking, for example, when we were working in Los Angeles, this is when I was with the NAACP, but it's all the same. There was a shelter for, it's a transitional project for women and children in domestic violence situations. So it's the Genesee Center for Domestic Violence Prevention and Intervention. And we worked with grid alternatives to do where they trained the women who were in the transitional housing to do solar installations on their transitional housing. So they actually, they came in and trained folks to install their own solar panels on their homes. And so not only did that provide a free solar for the transitional housing, which is because electricity was one of their biggest bills, it also provided a skill that now all of those women who were trained are now living independently and full-time employed in the solar industry. And this was a partnership between the NAACP, Grid Alternatives, and United Methodist Women. And so those kind of partnerships are super powerful in terms of just, again, it was all women coming together to get this done for women by women, and long lasting. It helped the transitional housing, it helped the individual women, it helped the planet by taking those greenhouse gas emissions that were replaced by solar. All of that, it was a multi-solving approach, and it certainly helped our future in terms of the children that were also liberated from those circumstances that they were in. So to think about those kinds of multi-solving projects could be interesting to think about. Just basically helping to amplify. We have a couple of things coming out ourselves recently where soon, where we're going to be lifting up the work of frontline communities on the front lines of oil and gas industries. And it's called What We're Fueling at the Pump. And it was after I had participated in this People's Health Tribunal where people were giving testimony from Mozambique, South Africa, Uganda, and the Niger Delta, talking about the atrocities of Shell Oil and Total Energies in those communities. And afterwards, I was inspired because I was, like you said, I was on the road. So I'm doing this tribunal virtually while driving through the South, visiting freedmen settlements. And as I was driving through the South, I was just seeing how many Shell oil stations that I was passing. So I'm listening to these stories about Shell's atrocities and filling up with Shell oil in the car that I'm driving. And so thinking about like how our consumerism is actually fueling those atrocities. Like that's the reality of it. And so what we're feeling at the pump is helping people to make that connection. It's not like this disconnected thing. We are directly funding these atrocities by providing the demand that they're supplying. And so helping to amplify that and helping to tell those stories and wherever people are, I think is important so that people know that there's alternatives, because we also include in the campaign, and here's what you could do differently, rather than, both kind of from the policies we can support, the politicians we can support, not support, and also ways that lifestyle changes that we can do to kind of starve the oil and gas industry. So those are a couple of things that we've got going, and recommendations in terms of frontline communities that people can be engaged in. And we'll also be putting up a lot more on our website. So yeah. And then also, if people, there's we go to volunteermatch.com to look for volunteers to do different things, whether it's helping with writing projects, helping with media, helping with even volunteering in a community. So if there was interest to do any of those types of projects, then we're always looking for reliable volunteers with emphasis on reliable. So you all so that's the thing about going to the volunteer matches, because you just don't know. But like folks like you who are out here on a Saturday interested in hearing these are obviously, I think it would be a lot more likely to be reliable than the random volunteer match folks. So if there is any interest that you might have in volunteering around some of these things, and we would also welcome that as well.
Great. And so open your mics, everyone. Jackie's open for questions. And I think what our hearing and what we will do and make sure is that we are connected to your website for certainly updates. So what, dealing especially with the oil and gas companies, and how we can do boycotts, how we can do, and Angela up here is always talking about we got to change our consumerism culture. So again, I think that the hope is that when we connect and we build these relationships, and now we have a personal relationship with Jackie and her organization, and that makes a huge difference. And to hear your story and your work is so inspiring and hopeful. So others who want to ask a question.
So first, thank you for the work. I mean, that's challenging work. I'm a retired social worker, so I know being in the trenches is like.
Yeah.
What I would love to hear about is the shift, the changes that you have seen from the past and now, because so much has occurred. And so I want your take on what it was like, not so much what it was like, what you've seen. Are we moving closer to taking care of issues, or are we getting further away? Because sometimes it feels like we're getting further away from solving what we need to be looking at. So thank you.
Yeah, no,
and I'm sending you an email as I'm talking.
Okay, good. I look forward to that. Thank you. Yeah, so that's the question. That's a very, very, very good question. In so many ways, there are so many points of light and hope. Like even during COVID, it was interesting to see like what was possible. Universal basic income was proven to be possible during COVID. The notion of mutual aid, of us all coming together, was, it was shown to be possible during COVID, like us doing being kind of a maker society where we're doing local making. I mean, the sourdough revolution, like I made all the ingredients for a bruschetta on my tiny little balcony of my condo and made an amazing bruschetta. Like all of that was shown to be possible. And I think that a significant amount of that kind of continues on, like those gardens that were started are continuing. The notion of communities helping, the relationships that were forged continue. Some of the mutual aid continues. And then we have people who are actually introducing universal basic income at the municipal level. So all of that is promising, that people are increasingly seeing, finally kind of seeing the connection between what we're doing and climate change and taking some responsibility for that, and not believing the false narratives of the oil and gas industry has progressed. I mean, what has also progressed is the rise in hate, the rise in hate, the rise in kind of divisiveness. Even while we're coming together on one side, on the other side, these divisions are getting deeper. So, like, that's that's a thing. The other thing is that as much as there are these advancements that are happening, when we're thinking about the climate clock and how quickly it's moving along, it's really kind of moving towards too little too late. And now we're going to have to start talking about how we're going to be surviving in a planet that has like X number of 90-degree days, like that has like just constant catastrophic disasters. Like we're really having to kind of come to terms with the fact that we're not going to turn this around in time if we continue at this rate. And that's the bottom line there. And and the concern is that that as we continue, like at some point we're getting closer to realizing that we can't continue business as usual, but fully realizing it enough to kind of do the massive scale systems change, that's probably going to happen in the context of societal collapse. I mean, that sounds so grim, but it's but just, I mean, if you just have to look around, I'm not telling you anything that you aren't already seeing directly. So look, it's funny how often I quote Winston Churchill, but Winston Churchill said that you can always count on America to do the right thing once they've exhausted every other possibility. And and that's kind of a little bit of the challenge you got there. But on the promising front, there are, like I said, towards the middle of what I was saying before, is that there are so many communities that are rising up and, growing their own food, starting to have municipally owned water systems, generating their own energy through microgrids or otherwise. Like, there's so many kind of points of light and fire and progress. What we need is for that to really just reach scale, for us to really get through as it relates to the climate crisis. So yeah, I know that was a bit of a mixed response, but
well, it is a mix, and I'm glad, Jackie, that you don't sugarcoat it, because we do need to wake up. The complacency needs to, as we've exhausted all other things, as Winston Churchill, women, and I think women, because we want a healthy planet for our children and the future generations. We are on the front lines, whether we know it or not, and we can be the real change makers. And that's the message that we give in the Green Tent Circle, you give, and that's why we're doing that. Everybody can do something for Mother Earth.
Okay, I just wanted to say what an honor and a pleasure it is to be here to hear you speak. Later on today, I actually have a major speaking engagement with the for UN Day. It's today. And so to hear you break down these 4 points of climate justice, gender justice, equity, and healing justice, are those your 4 pillars? I think that it's right on time. So thank you. Thank you so much. You are amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, and you will love Marty. I mean, she's an actress. She's a singer. She has the Ungun Institute. She is so dynamic that I just fall over in awe. So her energy is amazing. One other thing before I close, we are working on having a workshop, Jackie, at the UN Commission on the Status of Women.
Yeah.
Women on the front lines for climate solutions. And I think you'll probably be at CSW, won't you? Okay, so we'll have you on the panel and we'll talk about it later. And now I'm going to say thank you all for being